All right, here's the first question that was submitted to us through Discord as a text question, and it reads: Is achieving a critical mass of ANCAPs actually possible? As a pessimistic ANCAP, I believe that most people are not low time preferenced enough to want anarcho capitalism. I'm under the impression that many would sooner turn to accepting various forms of statism or socialism, regardless of historical data, believing it'll be different this time. So, what's your take on that?
So people accept socialism and statism because of the philosophy they hold. And I think the pessimistic ANCAP here is kind of putting the cart before the horse or reversing cause and effect in a certain way. The question is, what causes people to accept things like socialism, things like statism? And well, the answer is that uh, if you have a certain philosophy in place and it implies those things, then that's what's going to be accepted by the majority of people, right? What does it mean for somebody to be a normie, for instance? What it means to be a normie is that you accept the norms of the day, you adopt the norms of the day, and you just follow them without question. This is most people. Most people do not really have the time to think about philosophy or really have their own philosophy at all. So those people are just going to accept whatever is given. And if you have this sort of what we're in right now is a period where, yeah, the philosophy of the day is a very collectivist one. And so you expect people to be collectivist in their politics, even. And collectivism in politics, what that leads to in its modern form is something like socialism. So I don't agree that it's impossible to achieve that critical mass of ANCAPs. All you have to do is change the philosophy of the day into one which implies anarcho-capitalism, and then it all just falls into place. Like, you don't have to micromanage every individual step. You don't have to go out there and convince 8 billion people of this, because 98% of those 8 billion people don't actually think about philosophy. All you need to convince is that 2% of people. Once you convince that 2% of people of a philosophy which implies anarcho-capitalism, once you do that, everything else inevitably falls into place because everybody else is just a follower. Like, that's why I am so white-pilled. That's why everybody should be white-pilled. You simply do not have to care about the vast majority of people. They do not matter in terms of strategy.
Great answer. And luckily for us, our friend who submitted the question over text is actually here as our first caller. So I'm going to bring them in. Sen, I think I'm saying your name correctly. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Did you catch much of Zulu's answer?
Unfortunately, no. I got here when the timer is on like 3 minutes, but I can always watch the VOD later. But yeah,
No, that's okay. Well, now that because we were answering it because it came in as a text question, but then we saw you were in the call queue. So I'm sure Zulu, you don't mind giving sort of a brief answer, a condensed version, and then we can maybe go into a back and forth on that.
Sure. So the super condensed version would be that the philosophy of the day, that gives you what the people in general are going to feel. The vast majority of people are going to feel. So the vast majority of people right now, they are endorsing these socialist collectivist policies because they implicitly accept a collectivist philosophy. But if you change that philosophy, where are they getting their philosophy from? They're getting it from the philosophers, right? They're getting it from the few people who actually bother to think about and promulgate some philosophy. That's where they're getting it from. So if you reach those people, those are the only people who matter. They are the source of the stream. And if you control the source, you control everything downstream.
okay. Well, um, my question would be, how many percent do you think is the quote unquote critical mass? If we look at Russia, I think the often cited number is that 10% of the Russian population participated in the Bolshevik Revolution, starting from the highest card-carrying party members and all the uh, armed workers and armed soldiers that were participating in the revolution itself. So, what do you think is the critical mass? I heard the 2% thing. Why do you think that's the number?
So, for a specific area, I reckon it would probably, in fact, be a lot less than 2%. If you get the thinkers in some area to accept the correct philosophy, then that's going to spread out in that area. And then it can keep, it's like a virus, it's exponential growth. Those people, you convert some of those thinkers, they'll go off and convert other thinkers. Like, this is how the history of philosophy progresses. Some new paradigm comes about from somebody who has just taken philosophy by its reins, and then it just spreads out on its own, in a sense. Like, it is on the individual level. All you have to do is focus on converting the thinkers in society onto the correct philosophy. And it would not take a whole lot of people. I can't give you a specific percentage, but it would not take a whole lot of people to reach that tipping point at which, I suppose it depends on what critical mass we're looking for. The critical mass of people for us to be set as the next coming up philosophy, very, very few. We're probably already there. The critical mass of people to take over some region and make it anarchist, well, that's going to depend on the region, right? So critical mass has different meanings in different contexts.
Well, okay, then, you know, regardless of what the critical mass is, I would agree with you that we should try to convert people as best as we can. I just, a matter of managing expectation, I guess, because, yeah, pardon me, it's just hard to imagine 2% or a certain percent of people would be enough to cascade into significant change. It would be somewhat more imaginable if, let's say, well, maybe a certain amount of people in this position in power or in this position in this council or things like that. I think that's how Lenin did it. It wasn't just, as you say, convert people in general, but it's convert people who can hold key positions in society.
So the real question is, what are the true key positions? Because if you're some politician somewhere, the question is, how did you get to be that politician? Because as what's his face, the guy who invented FEE, Foundation for Economic Education, can't remember his name, the iPencil guy. He points out that, well, politicians are actually not thermostats; they're rather thermometers. They just follow the political temperature. So if I wanted to be elected mayor of London right now, it's not going to happen, right? Because the political temperature in London is not amicable for anarcho-capitalist policies. It just simply isn't. So you have a sort of survivorship effect, a sort of natural selection towards the politicians which do reflect the political temperature of the time. So they aren't actually fundamental in shifting that political temperature. What is fundamental in shifting that political temperature? It is the philosophers. It's the people who are speaking to trying to change the philosophy of the day. Those are the people who are actually moving society in some particular direction.
I think my problem with this would be that, okay, let's say you have this core philosophers, I guess you could say, that makes it public, this anarcho-capitalism. I don't think the very nature of anarcho-capitalist philosophy is similar to other philosophies that have rapid changes in society. Because if you look at Bolshevism, Marxism in Russia, if we look at Christianity in the early Roman Empire, I think the core distinction is that these ideas are appealing to people who are very high time preference. Socialism, I think it should be obvious. You're shaking your head there. Oh, you're disagreeing.
Yeah, so why are people higher time preference, right? That is caused by their philosophy. So you're still not getting at the fundamentals here. So the reason why Bolshevism took off is because it was set up. There already had to be some sort of Hegelian collectivist philosophy taking off in that area of the world at that time. Like, because that's how the history of philosophy went. Right now, as far as the history of philosophy is going, we are in a massively skeptic period. We are in the bust phase, effectively, where people are just completely rejecting philosophy entirely. That's why we get the pragmatist movement, right? Because we're in this philosophical bust, what sets up for another constructive phase. We need some other constructive phase, and we get that in the form of Ayn Rand. So unless another Plato comes along, because Ayn Rand is just another Aristotle. So unless we get another Plato to come along to try and negate Ayn Rand, then Ayn Rand simply is set to take over the philosophical landscape, unless it all goes horribly wrong and, Ayn Rand is buried, as Aristotle was originally. But as far as it's going right now, it's very much looking like Ayn Rand objectivism is going to take over. Yes, Leonard Reed, that's the iPencil guy.
I'll need some time to chew on that. Galazar, you have any thoughts?
Well, I hate to hear that anyone's feeling pessimistic. And if I'm able to contribute any sort of force in the opposite direction about that, I think Zulu already sort of implied the most important, what I think at face value anyway, is the most important consideration to maybe alleviate some of that pessimism, is that it is indeed the case. Because I think, based on the framing of your question, the apparent high time preference of society in general, the majority of individuals in society, seems to be a major explanation for your pessimism. But like Zulu observed, time preference is not a simply concrete element of your person, such that each person has some kind of specific time preference and they're just stuck with it. It's easy to come up with examples that change time preference. I think Hoppe, for example, in his literature, talks extensively about how the state is constantly affecting a change on people's time preference. You see this, the introduction of uncertainty and the introduction of costs encourage people to take fewer risks and consume things more immediately. This is bringing about a change. So, because of the fact that this time preference is not a absolute brute fact, that time preference is actually influenced by our surroundings, our conditions, it seems to me that that alone implies that there's something resolvable about the problem. Does that make sense?
I don't quite follow. Sorry.
So, if you're concerned about people having too high of a time preference, then you're identifying a solvable problem, a problem that has a concrete answer to it. So, like Zulu's talking about a 2% or less, if we start affecting even the smallest of changes that start to move us away from some of the socialist policies that we see in the world, obviously this can happen on a large scale, like it does in Argentina, for example. But these repeals are just as capable of moving people towards a lower time preference as the state is capable of putting people towards a higher time preference. Does that sort of clear it up a little bit?
Oh yeah, I see it now. So even incremental wins away from the state is an incremental change in society away from high time preference.
Right, exactly. And I guess really to just put a ribbon on that is to say, you've got a problem, a specific thing that's causing you this concern. And I don't want to convince you like that's not a problem, don't be a pessimist anymore. I want to leave you with the notion that that problem is solvable and it's very malleable, the environment that people are in. Like we see higher time preference as a result of living in a high crime area, but this is criminality is a solvable problem. I don't mean that in like an idealistic utopian sense, but it's something where we have really clear economic understandings of what's contributing to criminality and poverty. Poverty being an example of something that's contributing to criminality. So we aren't stuck in a situation where there's just a set amount of people and they have a set time preference as if it's a objective numerical value, and that numerical value is just too high for us to have ANCAP. Rather, it's just one of the many things that we have to take into consideration, but it's not something that's in our way. It's just like Zulu's saying about the politicians. Politicians are like thermometers. I think a lot of the time preference isn't something that's an obstacle to us, but it's a thermometer of our progress.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Um, Last question would be, in recent history, Milei's victory in Argentina is certainly inspiring, but it's hard for me to get a gauge of what actually went on there, especially trying to know whether people who voted for him, how much of them really believe in anarcho-capitalism. Probably not most, but I would like to know why, now of all times, they don't believe in the high time preference option anymore. Is it just spite for the government or something?
So, I'm not sure that I could particularly speak to all those people. I don't have any in-depth knowledge in the political situation in Argentina. But certainly what it does show is that the people in Argentina, the political temperature has kind of shifted away from the Peronism, from the socialism. Now there certainly will be still plentiful socialists there, but clearly they're not the overwhelming majority any longer as they once were. I think that's about as much as I could say on that front, unless Galzar has anything to add to that.
No, I think that sums it up.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. It's hard to get a sense of the Spanish-speaking internet over there. But
What we really
yeah,
need to look at with Argentina is, because I agree with you. I also am sort of limited in how much exactly I can understand confidently what's what all the specific minutiae that's going on in Argentina is, and I don't want to accidentally present myself as an expert on the topic. What I think we can gain from that is we can see things that are, I mean, you don't need to be familiar with living in Argentina to know, okay, well, public services are being repealed, right? Like they're taking away certain public expenses, certain public services. That's an example. That's enough of an example to say, hey, we can see these large scale changes take place, and we can observe in the world that um, it is not the case that there's some sort of static amount of time preference that's locking us out of progress.
yeah, okay. This has been productive. I see a clearer way.
So, having had this conversation with us now, has this helped you at all, do you think, in because there's two elements of this. There's one sort of like a matter of clarity, but I'm curious, do you feel that this has maybe helped you move in the direction of being a little less pessimistic about the entire process?
Oh yeah, certainly. The clarity of way is appreciated, but in terms of getting rid of the pessimism, well, I don't know about that.
Well, it takes time.
Yeah.
I think that sounds like it basically sums up all of your questions. If you'd like, I can give you the last word, and we can move on to the next caller.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thanks so much for reaching out. I thought we had a nice chat, and I hope that you will call out again in the future if you've got any other questions.
I did want to make a comment on Milei, kind of not specifically related to his question, but just in general, because it seems like there is this large amount of people trying to counter signal Milei and saying that he's not like following the anarcho-capitalist theory and so on and so forth, which certainly there are justified criticisms of Milei. Sorry, certainly that exists, but I do want to point out, like, we have to look at the context of what Argentina was before. Before it was the Peronists, it was literal socialist party control. So I think it is worthwhile noting Malay is certainly a massive improvement over what came before. Sure, he hasn't managed to turn Argentina anarcho-capitalist. I'm not sure of how much political power he has there, and whether he could be doing more. Maybe he could be doing more. But he's certainly improved things a hell of a lot over the alternative. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Sure. There's nothing to gain from holding anybody to a standard of perfection. There's so much good that can be done just shy of that.